thank you for coming to our first Wednesday of this series. And what better way to start it off with than with the science of happiness. Although, as I've said on several occasions, just living in Brattleboro is cause enough for happiness. So I am so happy to live here. So tonight I do have a few announcements. I noticed I had a little problem with my PowerPoint, so let me quickly run down our sponsors, which are the National Life Group of Foundation. Okay, I'll talk louder. Thanks, Maris. All right. Vermont Department of Libraries, Carol and Jeff Gaddis, Chroma Technology, Crosby Gannett Fund of the Vermont Community Foundation, Merchants Bank, University of Vermont Humanities Center, Vermont Public Radio. And for our local underwriters, we have the Brattleboro Camera Club, Brattleboro Savings and Loan, right across the street, Downs Racklin Martin PLLC, the Richards Group, and World Learning. And most of all, we have to thank your friends and mine, the Friends of the Brooks Memorial Library. So let's give them a big hand. So it is my pleasure to introduce the introducer. And so I would like to introduce David. Sorry, I had him write it down and I can't read his writing. Gentlemen?
Yeah.
All righty then. And he is the co-director of the UVM Humanities Center, and he'll tell us about our speaker.
Happy to be here at the Brooks Memorial Library. As you heard, my name is David Gentleman. I am the co-director of the UVM Humanities Center, and tonight we at the Humanities Center at UVM are partnering with the Vermont Humanities Council through the generous gift of a grant from the Gladys Kriebel-Delmas Foundation to inaugurate a series of lectures that we are taking around the state this year on happiness. So in November, Billy Collins will be speaking at the State House on the theme of happiness, and to cap us off in December, Darren McMahon from Dartmouth College will be speaking in Norwich. And so I invite you to go to the Vermont Humanities Council website to check out where our other happiness lectures will be. Please join us there. Since we are in a library, I just think it's only right to say that one of the things we do at the UVM Humanities Center is 2 or 3 times a year we host a mayor's book club, and the mayor and the Humanities Center, we buy books for anyone in the city and in the state who cares to join us for a discussion of the books, and so look for that from the Humanities Center as well. Tonight, I'm really happy to introduce our first speaker in the Happiness Lecture Series, Catherine A. Sanderson, who is the Manuel Family Professor of Life Sciences in Psychology at Amherst College. She had a shorter commute than I did here this evening. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology with a specialization in health and development from Stanford, and received both her master's and PhD from Princeton University in New Jersey. Professor Sanderson's research examines how personality and social variables influence health-related behaviors such as safer sex, disordered eating, and as I learned just about an hour ago, sleep and sleep behavior. That's your current research project. She uses this research in the development of persuasive messages about these practices and to develop interventions to prevent unhealthy behavior and the predictors of relationship satisfaction. This research has led to a grant from funding from the NIH. She is the author of over 25 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, 4 textbooks, and a popular press book on parenting. One of the things I've come to discover in talking with her and reading some of her bio materials is that we share certain interests and ideas. One of them is that we have a phenomenal passion for teaching, but we hate grading. The other is that we both feel that children in the abstract can bring happiness, but in practice, not so much. And finally, if either of us ever ends up getting divorced, the aggrieved party gets to keep the dog, and the grieving party gets the children. With that, I am very excited to hear about the signs of happiness, and please help me in welcoming Catherine Sanderson.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. So I'm delighted to be here tonight, and I want to start by sharing a very quick story. So I gave a version of this talk at a corporate event in Orlando, Florida in April, and at the end of the talk, a woman came up afterwards and said, "There were a lot of different choices of talks to go to, and I chose to go to yours, even though I was really worried that I would hate you." And she said, "I figured I would go, and here would be this little Mary Sunshine talking about how perfect life is and happiness, and I would just want to strangle you." And she goes, and I don't hate you, so thanks so much, for that last hour. And so I want to start by saying that I am not somebody who is always happy or genetically happy, or that happiness comes too easily. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed giving this talk. So I'm going to be talking today for about 45 minutes. I'll leave time for questions. But I'm going to be talking first of all about why we care about happiness. I'm then going to be talking about mistakes we make in the pursuit of things that don't really bring us happiness. Then I'm going to talk about the good news. What do we know actually does make us happy? And finally, I'm going to talk about strategies you can use and implement in your own lives to increase happiness. And none of them are like, sell all of your belongings and move to Aruba. So they're not tricky. So I want to start, though, by talking about why we care about happiness, and basically why we should all care about happiness. And that's because happy people are fundamentally different from people who are not happy in ways that really matter. So first of all, happy people are more helpful. They're kinder, they're gentler, they're nicer, they're less hostile. So again, all things we care about. In a really simple illustration of this story, researchers went to a local mall and they stopped random strangers and asked them for very low-level favors. Could I borrow your cell phone? Would you mail this letter? Could I have change for $1? So very low-level favors. But what they varied was where you got asked the favor. And half the people got asked in front of a good-smelling store, like Cinnabon or Mrs. Fields Cookies. And half the people got asked in front of a neutral-smelling store, like Banana Republic or The Gap. Guess who got help faster? Cinnabon. So now you've already learned some information you can use if you ever need help in a mall. Happy people are also, very importantly, less hostile. A few years ago, I was going to the local McDonald's in my town. Kids were in the back seat. I waited for the light to turn green. The light turned green. I proceeded to start to make a legal turn into the drive-through line. And a car in the opposite direction ran their red light at a very high rate of speed and nearly careened into me. So I swerved and braked to one side, and they swerved and went to the other side, and we didn't collide. But it was very narrowly a really serious collision. So I took a minute, caught my breath, then proceeded to turn into the McDonald's drive-through line. And guess who's now in front of me in the line? That car. So they place their order, they go to the window to pick it up, and as they're going to the window, they proceed to have like a 20-minute conversation with the cashier, like it's their long-lost cousin or something. And I'm getting more and more frustrated. You nearly killed me? Now it's a 20-minute drive-through experience? Finally, they pull away. And as they pull away, they roll their window down, they stick their hand out, and they do a little wave like this towards my car. So I rolled down my window, and I made a different gesture, and they drove away. I go to the window, I hand my credit card to the cashier, and the cashier says, "Oh, that car paid for your food." So then I felt like that. And again, they'd driven away, and my kids had seen the gesture, and clearly at that point they thought it was fair, right? we nearly killed you, but your Egg McMuffin is free, so we're good, right? We're good. And again, but in that moment, my anger faded, my hostility faded, and I'm going to talk at the end today about how even small little things can absolutely increase our happiness. Next thing, happy people are more productive at work. Happy people are overwhelmingly more productive at work. Here's a picture of Google headquarters. Circular slide. The Silicon Valley companies have gone out of their way to make the workplace fun. There's circular slides, there's ping pong tables, there's free food, there's all sorts of perks to make the workplace fun. One Silicon Valley company profiled on the front page of the New York Times is doing something new to make their employees happy. They're sending a cleaning service to every employee's house every week. Would that make you happy? Yes. And would you ever leave that job? I mean, that's right. So you're going to work hard. You're going to recommend that employer to your friends. You can never quit. And you also can work harder. You don't have to leave at 5 to go home and vacuum. Somebody's already at your house vacuuming right then. You're good. So again, we have learned through workplace studies that happy people are more productive at work. But most importantly, and what we should all care about, is that happy people are also healthier people. And this is true no matter how you measure it. Happy people experience better health. In a study that my college students find particularly disgusting, researchers recruited healthy volunteers. They measured their level of happiness, and then, with the people's permission, they inserted a cold virus into their nostril. Then they followed them for 4 weeks. They measured, are you coughing? Are you sneezing? Do you feel sick? They collected saliva to test for antibodies to the cold in their bodies. They also, every night, gathered the people's used tissues and weighed them to measure mucus production. Across every dimension, happy people recovered faster. They didn't get sick as often. So again, this is when the cold virus had been directly inserted into their bodies. They still were able to fight off the cold. Another example, happy people also recover faster from surgery. They've done other studies where you bring in people for routine scheduled surgeries. You measure their level of happiness the night before the surgery, and then you look at recovery. How quickly do they get out of bed? How much pain medication do they require? What were the nurses' reports? How quickly do they get discharged from the hospital? Across every dimension, happy people recover faster from surgery than people who are less happy. Finally, and most importantly, happy people live longer. And the next study I'm going to talk about uses a really interesting sample, professional baseball players. What they did in this study was they looked at the men's rookie baseball card photos, and they rated their facial expressions. Then, they looked at how old the men were when they died. And here's the data. Men who had a flat expression, neutral expression, lived to be about 73. Men who had a slight smile on the rookie baseball card lived to about 75. Men who had a big booming smile on their rookie baseball card lived about to 80 years. So the happiness expressed on your rookie baseball card was highly correlated with your life expectancy. And again, this study controlled for family history, blood pressure, whether you smoked, weight, all the different things we might expect are associated with life expectancy. So I hope you now understand why we all should dramatically care about not only our own happiness, but the happiness of people around us, that happy people truly are different in ways that really and fundamentally matter. But here's the problem. We do lots of things in a misguided attempt to find happiness. We're basically doing the wrong things. So let me talk about some of these errors. Guess what the number one thing is that we think will make us happy, but it really doesn't. We're wrong. Number one thing. Money. Overwhelmingly money. People think, if I just had more money, then I would be happy. Here's a picture of Tiger Woods' house, or maybe now Tiger Woods' ex-wife's house. And people think, gosh, if I lived in a house like that, how could I not be happy every single minute of every single day? But research shows that the correlation between money and happiness, with one important exception, is non-existent. Happy people are not happier, wealthy people are not happier than poorer people. Here's the one important exception. If you're living below the poverty line, so you're worried, are my kids gonna have enough food tomorrow? Are we gonna have a safe place to sleep tonight? Are we gonna have heat this winter? If you're concerned about survival, more money absolutely increases happiness. But if you're not concerned about basic survival, more money does not bring more happiness because we simply adapt. We adapt to newfound wealth, we adapt to newfound raises, to newfound money. And let me give you an easy example that we can all probably relate to. Who remembers getting their first cell phone? Many of us, maybe you recognize it in this picture somehow. So when you got your first cell phone, it was really exciting because you could call people from the car. It was incredible. But here's the challenge. Cell phones change all the time. They get better and better and better and faster. And now most of us expect our cell phone can not only call people from the car, but can also let us shoot a movie, read a book, buy a dress, etc. That we're no longer happy with the cell phone that used to be so very exciting. We expect things to be more and better, etc. And that's the same thing that we experience with money. And some people have known this for a long time. So this is a quote by Benjamin Franklin. Money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. And that's the challenge. So let me talk about another thing that we're wrong about. People overwhelmingly think climate. Climate absolutely matters. And most people think if I just lived in a warmer, sunnier climate, surely I would be happier. If you do large-scale surveys of Americans and you say, would you be happier if you lived in California or North Dakota? Guess what pretty much everybody says? California. Pretty much everybody says that. I've given this talk a couple times in which somebody in the audience is from North Dakota, and they really hate that finding. But I didn't create it, I'm just reporting it. So I tell students in my health psychology class, though, a joke that plays on this belief. So here's the joke. A patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I have terrible news. You have 6 months to live. And the patient says, well, that is terrible news. What do you suggest I do? And the doctor says, you should immediately move to North Dakota. And the patient says, well, absolutely, I'll do that right away. And if I move to North Dakota, will I live longer? And the doctor says, no, but it will feel like forever. People from North Dakota also really do not like that joke. But anyway, so the point is, though, that joke is only funny because we have this expectation that life would pass so slowly if I lived in North Dakota. Gallup poll 2 years ago, North Dakota is one of the top 5 happiest states. We have no idea why, but they're very happy. So again, we're wrong. Another example of something that we think will make us happy, life events. Most of us think, if just this particular life event happens, then I will be happy. I graduate from college, I retire, I buy a house, I get a promotion, whatever it is. When that thing happens, then I will be happy. So let's say you want a promotion, and you work to try to get promoted, and then all of a sudden, you get that promotion. What do you then have to do? That job, as it turns out. Yeah, and that job has pressure and deadlines and stress and colleagues and all of the same kind of things that you were struggling with before. So that permanent happiness you thought would be yours from this promotion, in fact, you're also wrong. We adapt to the promotion just like we adapt to the more money, the better climate, etc. But interestingly, there is one kind of life event that many people experience, and this life event is actually different because it is consistently associated with happiness for some people. So this is the life event of marriage. So who here is married? So again, that's a relatively common life event that people experience. What's interesting about the data on marriage and happiness is that marriage absolutely makes some people consistently happy. And those people are called men. Yes. That's right. I can always just wait and a woman will say it. It's invariably. And what's interesting is men are never like women. No, it's not women. So what's interesting is that married men are happier than single men, they're healthier than single men, they live longer than single men, they make more money than single men, they're less likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders. Married men have a wonderful, better life experience than just single men. And what's even better for the men is that it doesn't matter who you're married to. Somebody is good. Here's the challenge for women. For women, women who are happily married are in fact happier and healthier than single women. But women who are in a bad marriage are really unhappy and really unhealthy. So the key is, for women, quality matters. You need a good marriage and you need to avoid a bad marriage. For men, marriage is marriage is marriage. It's all good. And so really my advice is, in terms of happiness, if you're a man, find somebody. But if you're a woman, you really need to be picky. You really need to be picky. You need to choose the right someone. So it's harder. And what I like about that finding is, by all accounts, this setup is better for William than for Kate. William's gonna be happy. Kate, we hope she's gonna be happy, but William's mom, not happy in her marriage. And so again, that's the challenge for women. Let me talk about one more thing, which my lovely introduction referred to, and that is parenthood. That indeed, in the abstract, having kids seems like a great idea. Here's a little bit of an outdated picture of my 3 kids. Right, and in the picture, they look really quiet, clean, well-behaved. And that's really the challenge, is that in the abstract, having children seems like a great idea. But the reality of day in and day out being a parent is what? Hell. It's stress. It's exhausting. And so the day in and day out of parenthood is not filled with happiness. It's playing really boring games with no strategy. It's doing tremendous amounts of laundry. It's touching poop. And as Annie Lamott says, having a baby is like suddenly getting the world's worst roommate. So the challenge is, if you look at the association between parenthood and happiness, is it's really complex. Because on one hand, parents compared to non-parents have more joy. There is the excitement of the homemade Mother's Day card, your kid learning to swim or read a book, and these sort of wonderful peak moments of parenthood. And those peaks, in fact, are higher than the peaks that non-parents experience. But the challenge is, parenthood is also associated with lows that non-parents don't experience. Stress and heartache and worry and anxiety. And so what you see about the data between happiness and parenthood is that parents have more highs and parents have more lows, and non-parents have a much more sort of even keel existence. Now sometimes I'll give one of these talks and somebody will come up afterwards and say, Catherine, you need to remember, if you have children, you might get grandchildren, and grandchildren make me very happy. And what I say to that is, God, I hope that's true. So I'll leave it at that. All right. So I've talked about why we care about happiness, and I've talked about what doesn't make us happy. I now want to turn and talk about the good news. What actually does make us happy? And the good news is, there are lots of things. So first of all, there are many behaviors that we can do in our daily life that in fact are consistently associated with happiness. So first of all, eating. Eating absolutely makes people happy. That's not going to be super surprising. But it's not just the act of chewing, swallowing. It's eating particular kinds of foods. Like what? Ice cream, chocolate, fatty foods, sugar. There's absolutely no evidence for like celery and happiness. So it's eating particular kinds of foods. It's not just eating in general. Now, fortunately, that's coupled with the evidence that exercising makes us happy. Who here has heard about the link between exercise and endorphins and happiness? Anybody here? Yeah, so a number of you have heard about that. And that's absolutely true. Exercising increases this level of endorphins in our body. It actually feels really good while we're doing it. And one of the best feelings we can have is the feeling of having exercised. Right? You know what I mean, right? And unfortunately, the only way you can get the having exercise feeling is to exercise first. It's too bad. So we know that exercising makes us very happy. We also know that shopping makes us happy. That's not going to be particularly surprising. But here's what's much more interesting. It's not about shopping acquiring things. So who here has had a wonderful experience of happiness because you found the perfect gift for somebody you care about? And that feeling of happiness is higher than the level of happiness when you buy something for yourself. And so it doesn't appear that it's shopping acquiring things. It's really about shopping building relationships. And that's a really important finding. What else do we know? And this reminded me, I can't see where she is right now, but the first introduction to my introduction, nature. So certainly living in a place like this should absolutely make you happy. And in fact, science suggests that's true. People who experience nature, looking at nature, spending time in nature, absolutely experience higher levels of happiness. What's really important also is they experience better health. So in a dramatic illustration of this, researchers a couple of years ago went to a hospital in Pennsylvania. This hospital was set up in two distinct wings. One wing overlooked a parking lot, so there was asphalt, cars, etc. The other wing of the hospital overlooked a lovely park. So there were trees and grass and flowers, etc. So what they did in this study was they compared rates of recovery for people who had had the exact same surgery. They looked at how quickly you recovered simply based on which wing you had been assigned to. And what they found is that people who were in the wing overlooking the park got out of bed faster, had better reports from the nurses, needed less pain medication, and got discharged from the hospital faster. So looking at nature doesn't just make us feel good psychologically, it also seems to have important benefits for us in terms of physical health and recovery from surgery. Now, in a more recent study, researchers wanted to understand why. What's going on at a neurological, physical level that leads to this explanation of nature and better health? So they brought in people and put them in an MRI machine, so a machine that measures brain activation. And they showed them different pictures, and they looked at how their brain responded. Now, I'm going to show you two actual pictures that were used in this study. They used pairs of about 30 pictures, but I'm going to show you two pictures that were actually used in this study. So as you can see here, the first picture is of an urban city skyline. The bottom picture is of a rural nature scene. Now, these pictures are both aesthetically appealing. So they're pretty. It's not that the urban scene is showing smog and traffic, etc. They're both aesthetically pleasing. They have a lot of sky, they have clouds, they have a range of colors. They're designed to be appealing visually. And yet, people's brains responded in dramatically different ways to these two sets of images. People who looked at the urban scene showed lots and lots of brain activation. Their brain was firing, their brain was engaged, their brain was active. People who were looking at the nature scene showed calm, relaxed brainwaves, like they were sleeping or meditating. So what this research suggests is it may be that spending time in nature, looking at nature, actually is very important at a physiological, at a neurological level in terms of calming us down, which helps our bodies heal. And so that's also a really important finding about the link between happiness and health. We also know, and some people probably already have this intuition, that personality really matters. Some people seem to always be happy. Some people seem to never be happy. And what the research would show is that this is really why circumstances, money, a promotion, better climate, whatever, don't really bring us the happiness that we think they would, because so much of our happiness is really rooted in our personality. This quote by Martha Washington illustrates this point. So as she said, "I am still determined to be cheerful and happy in whatever situation I may be. For I've also learned from experience that the greater part of our happiness or misery depends upon our dispositions and not upon our circumstances." And that's really the key. So what is it about personality that makes us happy? And research suggests three distinct kinds of personality traits. First of all, people who are extroverted, so people who are outgoing. They probably have an easier time forming social networks, finding relationships, etc. Two, people who feel good about themselves, so people who have high self-esteem. Here's a cartoon that illustrates the opposite. So somebody writing, "Dear diary, sorry to bother you again." And one of the ways that high self-esteem seems to help us find happiness is that people with high self-esteem are very good at finding the silver lining no matter the situation. They can find something good. I'm going to tell you now about a study that illustrated this, so pay attention because it's a little bit complicated, and if you lose me, then you'll be like, why is everybody laughing? And it'll be awkward. So what they did in this study was they brought in pairs of dating couples, so people who were dating each other, and they said, you're going to fill out the exact same questionnaire, and then we're going to compare your answers to see if people in a dating relationship rate the relationship in the same way. So you'll fill out the exact same questionnaire. So you came in with your dating partner, you sat opposite from them on a table, and the first person turned to their first page of the questionnaire, and it said, where'd you meet? How long have you been dating? This person turned to the first page of their questionnaire, and it said, where'd you meet? How long have you been dating? That's not the interesting part. Then this person turned to the second page of their questionnaire, and it said, please list everything you hate about your dating partner. So you start writing. Kind of messy, kind of stubborn, kind of stingy, whatever it is. Here's the key. This person turns to the second page of their questionnaire, and it says, please list absolutely every single item in your dorm room. So you start writing. I got my books, I got my shoes, I got my futon, I've got my comforter, I've got my phone, I've got my whatever. And you're writing and writing and writing. And this person is watching you. Are you with me? And they're thinking, my partner is so readily and easily, they're getting a hand cramp, they've asked for a stapler, they're using the back. What the hell is going on? As they're writing, kind of messy, kind of stubborn, whatever. So then, here's the key. Everybody turns to the third page of the questionnaire, and the third page for everybody says, how happy are you in your relationship? Here's what's amazing. People who are high in self-esteem, they write, oh, I'm so happy. After all, my partner hates 500 things about me, and we're still dating. So they're never going to leave me. I couldn't do anything worse than what I've done. It's like my soulmate. This is fate. This is a wonderful turn of events. And that's the ability of high self-esteem, to take what really should be a relationship damning experience and to find your soulmate in that moment. One more example of a personality trait that operates in much the same way, and that's the trait of optimism. People who are optimistic, again, have this amazing ability to find the silver lining. Freud told a story about a couple who came to see him in therapy, and at one point in the course of the therapy session, the husband turned to the wife and said, if one of us were to die, I think I would go and live in Paris. Because if it was one of us, it'd be you, because I have this Paris plan. Again, and that's sort of the ultimate ability to think, that would not be me that happened to. I have a son, my oldest son, who is in public school from kindergarten through 8th grade, and in 9th grade he moved to a prep school that he was woefully underprepared for. Involved a lot of struggle, a lot of challenge, a lot of tears, mostly mine. And it was going poorly academically, really in every possible way, but it was going especially poorly in Spanish. It was going poorly enough in Spanish that midway through Andrew's first trimester, he had a 50 in Spanish, a 5.0. This is a school that uses the traditional 1 to 100 grading scale, so 50 was really not good. So at the end of November, Andrew calls me and says, Mom, I got my grades. Good news about Spanish. And I said, oh, thank goodness, because I was so worried. What with the 50? And he said, yeah, good news. I said, great, what'd you get? And he says, I got a 58. And I said, that is not good news. And he said, no, I had a 50. This is 8 points higher. And I said, Andrew, that's an F. And he said, it's really an F plus. And I said, I'm a professor. That's not a grade. That's not one of our options, And he said, no, but at the rate I'm going, I'm going to have a 66 in January. And I said, that's a D. That's also bad. But here is what is wonderful about Andrew, and that is that Andrew will always be happy. Because anybody who can call their mom with the good news about their F+, he's going to be fine. So he's going to, probably call one day from prison, and but he's going to say, I have this bunk bed, I have a roommate, there's this exercise yard, they bring in the meals through the door 3 times a day, it's so relaxing. Again, he's going to be absolutely fine, and literally, I don't worry about him anymore. He's, probably going to be poor and living in my basement, but he's going to be happy because really he has that attitude of being able to find the good no matter the situation. And on a more serious note, that ability to find the good is essential in terms of finding happiness. Here's one of my favorite quotes, and this is by Nelson Mandela. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. So again, this ability to find hope, to find optimism, no matter your circumstances, is essential in terms of finding happiness. Let me talk about 2 more things. One, lots of research has examined the link between age and happiness. And this research is really fascinating because although I'm going to show you some data on it in just a minute, but what's particularly interesting is that the shape of the curve between age and happiness looks the same in all cultures. So I'm going to show you data from America. This is a giant sample, hundreds of thousands of people all across America in a Gallup poll of adults ages 18 to 85. But what's really important is the shape of the curve is the same in every single country they've studied. So it's not a uniquely American finding. It seems to be much more universal. So here's the data, and then I'll talk about what it means. So what this data shows, first of all, is that people who are 18 to 21 are very happy. And really, what the hell is there not to be happy about when you're 18 to 21? Then, and what is bad news for some people here, happiness drops like a stone, right up until around age 50. So again, this corresponds with what we think about in our society as the midlife crisis. It's also, perhaps coincidentally, a life period in which many people are living at home with teenagers. But here's the good news for everybody. Happiness then increases in your 50s and 60s and 70s, and they've done research with people up to 85. And in fact, at around 70, you hit the same happiness you had around 18 to 21, and then you get even happier. So that's an extraordinarily important finding. And what researchers have done following this finding is they've done qualitative interviews with people, asking them, what are they doing at different life stages to try to find this increased happiness? What they find very consistently is the following. People in their younger years are very focused on having lots and lots of social relationships. I call them, Facebook friends. People in their 60s and 70s and 80s get rid of the riffraff. They get rid of the riffraff and they focus on quality relationships over quantity. So they have fewer relationships, but the relationships they have are relationships with people they care about and who care about them. And this Peanuts cartoon really perfectly illustrates what the data in psychology would say. As we grow up, we realize it is less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones. Now, here's the practical question that maybe some of you are wondering. Do you have to live 80 years to be that smart? Right? I mean, that's kind of fundamentally the question. Do you need to have that much life experience? And so as a follow-up to this, researchers from Stanford interviewed a really unique sample. They looked at HIV-positive men who were living in San Francisco in the early 1990s. So these were men in their 40s and 50s, but they had, at the time, was a terminal disease. We didn't have cures for AIDS, we didn't have drug treatment, and these were men who were going to die of AIDS far, far earlier than they would have expected. And what they found was that these men did exactly what 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds do automatically. They got rid of the riffraff, They focused on a small number of relationships, quality over quantity. So what's fundamentally important about that finding is what it suggests is that when we believe time is running out because we're in our 80s or because we're in our 40s but have a terminal disease and are not going to reach our 50s or 60s, we automatically make the choice about quality relationships over quantity. But that means we can all do so whenever we want to. You don't have to be 80. You don't have to have a terminal disease to make that choice to choose quality relationships over quantity relationships. And fundamentally, that brings me to my last point, and that is that the number one predictor of our happiness is, in fact, the quality of our relationships. Number one predictor. Now, I've talked before about relationships. Marriage, if you're a man, children, for no one. But here's the key. Good relationships are extraordinarily important. We just have lots of flexibility about what those relationships are. They don't have to be marriage. They don't have to be parenthood. They can be relationships with friends. They can be relationships with family members. We have lots of choice about who those relationships are with. But here's the challenge in today's day and age. Who here has ever seen a couple, like in a restaurant or on a park bench or whatever, having a conversation that looked like this? Both of them on their cell phones. Who's ever seen that? Anyone? Anyone here? Yeah.
Really?
Right? I mean, all the time. So here's what's amazing. Research has shown that the mere presence of a cell phone decreases your ability to have meaningful quality conversations.
That's for sure.
So your intuition is exactly right. So here's a classic demonstration of this. They brought in strangers to have a get-to-know-you conversation in the lab. The researcher put them in different rooms. So you're paired up with a stranger and told you're going to have a 15-minute conversation. For half of the people just had a conversation and they recorded it and then they coded it for intimacy, quality, meaningfulness, how good was the conversation. The other half of the people, the researcher took her cell phone, she turned it off, and she put it on the table in between the two people having the conversation. So the phone is off. It's not going to ring, it's not going to vibrate. The phone also doesn't belong to either of the people having the conversation. It's not even their phone. And yet what they found was the presence of that phone on a table, turned off phone, led to a lower quality of conversation. The mere presence of a turned off phone led the conversation to be less meaningful, less intimate, less vulnerable. So imagine in our daily lives, when phones often aren't turned off, and they often do belong to us, what the mere presence of a phone does to our ability to have these quality relationships that are in fact the best predictor of our happiness. All right. In conclusion, I want to summarize what the research on happiness has told us, and that is that there are 3 components of happiness. Maybe some of you have been thinking about this as I've talked. So the first of those components is pleasure. And so this is like the pleasure you have from having a great piece of cheesecake, a great glass of wine, listening to a beautiful piece of music, looking at a beautiful piece of art. Those things are all pleasurable, and they do make us happy. But this is the least important aspect of happiness because it's fleeting. You probably don't feel happy today because of the wine you had last night, for example. So this is the least important. So what's more important? And what's more important is engagement. And not just engagement, but anticipation of your engagement. So who here has ever taken a wonderful trip that you thought about and planned for weeks and months ahead? What are we going to eat? What are we going to do? What are we going to see? Who's ever done that? So many of you, and that's a wonderful thing to do, because what you're doing is you're milking more happiness out of that experience. It's not just the 2 weeks you spent in Europe, it's the weeks and months you spent thinking, what are we going to do? What are we going to see? What are we going to eat? etc. And that's a wonderful way of extending happiness. I'm now going to give you a quote that speaks to this, perhaps from an unusual source, Winnie the Pooh. And here's the quote. "Well," said Pooh, "what I like best." And then he had to stop and think. Because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you begin to eat it, which was better than when you were. But he didn't know what it was called. And of course it's called anticipation. Very simple study. Researchers brought in people. Half of them are told, this is a chocolate rating study. here's some chocolates, unwrap them, eat them, rate how good they taste. Other half of people told, this is a chocolate rating study. Here are some chocolates that you can eat in 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, they let the people unwrap them, eat them, and rate them. Guess who liked the chocolate more? First group or second group? Second group thought the chocolate tasted that much better. So waiting 30 minutes led to increased enjoyment. Same thing as, kids on Christmas morning. They've anticipated, and that's the sort of joy of it. So, engagement, very, very important. Third thing, meaning. Doing things in your life that you find personally meaningful. This could be in your job, it could be in your community, it could be in volunteer work, it could be in your family, it doesn't matter. But doing things that you find personally meaningful. Here's a quote by Dale Carnegie that speaks to this. Are you bored with life? Then throw yourself into some work you believe in with all your heart. Live for it, die for it, and you will find happiness that you had thought could never be yours. I gave this talk in January at an event in New York City for women venture capitalists. So these were basically, women millionaires. And at the end of this talk, a woman came up afterwards and she said, I want to tell you a story about my husband. And she said, when we met, he was working on Wall Street, he was in finance, and he was making a lot of money. And he came home one night from work and said, honey, I hate my job, I have to quit. And she said, well, we have $20,000 of college loans to pay off, still. And he said, yes, but I have to quit because I hate it. And so he quit, and I said, okay, well, what does he do now? So she said, well, he's a firefighter. And I said, well, that's a really big shift. And I said, how is it? And she said, it's wonderful, because now he skips to work every time he goes. He loves it. He feels it's so important and so meaningful. And it's so much better being married to somebody who's happy than being married to somebody who makes a lot of money and hates his life. And that's what's really important, that doing things that you find meaningful in your job, your community, your family, whatever, is extraordinarily important in terms of predicting happiness. We also know, and I've talked about this earlier, that happiness is about half in our genes. This is probably the data on personality, so extroversion, self-esteem, optimism. And really what this means is that some people have a head start in terms of finding happiness. Happiness comes easier to some people than others. Here's a cartoon that speaks to this. So people standing outside a castle, and one person says, I could cry when I think of the years I wasted accumulating money, only to learn that my cheerful disposition is genetic. So yes, some people absolutely have a head start, but here's the key. This means that 50% of happiness is in our own control. And that's the part that I care about, because no matter where you're starting, 50% is within your control. That's a lot. What else do we know? We know that there is a tremendous capacity to adapt. And I've talked before today about this as being a bad thing, because we adapt to more money, we adapt to a job promotion, we adapt to better climate, we adapt to better cell phone, all of that. And so I've talked about how it's bad because we adapt to good events. People who win the lottery think they'll be happy forever. They're not. They're happy immediately. They get this influx of cash. You go back to them a year or two later, and they've returned to their original level of happiness. Again, if they weren't living below the poverty line. But here's why our capacity to adapt is really, really important. Our capacity to adapt also lets us adapt to bad events. And so this is why adaptation is a good thing for all of us. I'm going to tell you now about a story, and many of you will probably recognize the story given where I'm giving this talk. This is a story about the family of Dr. William Pettit. So this was a family living in a small town in Connecticut a few years ago. And one night, two men who'd recently been released from jail broke into this family's home. They tied up the dad in the basement. They tied the mom and the two girls to their beds. The mom and the two girls were both sexually assaulted. The girls were ages 11 and 17 at the time. Then, to hide evidence of their crimes, the men set the house on fire. And the mom and both daughters died of smoke inhalation. The dad was able to escape from the basement. He had a head injury. He lived. But most of us in hearing that story think, how could he ever find happiness again? He's lost his wife. He's lost both of his kids. And not only has he lost them, he's lost them in about the most horrific set of circumstances that we can kind of wrap our minds around. And most of us in hearing that story think, how could he ever find happiness again? And yet here's a picture of William Pettit from a few summers ago. He met a woman who volunteered for the foundation he established to honor his family's memory. She volunteered as a photographer. They became friends, and over time they fell in love. His first wife's family attended their wedding and said, "We're so happy that you have found love again, that you have found somebody to share your life with." And last December, they had a little boy. So that does not mean that he's the same happy as he was before this terrible tragedy. And it doesn't mean that the tragedy doesn't change and shape his every moment in his existence in fundamental ways, and always will. But what it does mean is that the power of the human spirit allows us to adapt even to terribly, terribly adverse circumstances and to find happiness again. And ultimately, what the research on happiness shows is that happiness is largely about the power of effort. We have to make a choice to be happy. We have to decide it's important to us. And we have to decide to structure our time and life and energy in ways that will make us happy no matter our circumstances. And this quote by Elizabeth Gilbert really speaks to this. Happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you have achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it. So in conclusion, and as promised, I always end this talk with specific strategies that you can use if this talk motivates you, which I hope it has, to make choices that bring you happiness in your own lives. And I give 10 because it's really important that you find strategies that work for you. So all of these 10 won't work for you, but my hope is that everybody here will find 2 or 3 that work for them. Let me also say at this point, anybody who wants a copy of this entire presentation, the last slide has my phone number and my email address. So I can email this to you, I can put a hard copy in the mail, etc. But you have a way to get all of it. You can take notes if you want, but you don't have to. So number 1, change your behavior. So we've talked today about a lot of different ways in which we can change our behavior that make us feel happier. So who here gets enough sleep? Okay. Who here makes a point of exercising regularly? So let me just point out that exercising is actually harder than sleeping. Just, you know. Who here makes a point of spending time outside in nature? And everybody living here should be doing this one every day. Who here meditates? Does anybody here meditate? Growing amount of evidence is pointing to the power of meditation helping us not only psychologically, but physically. This is very new data, and it's really fundamentally important. Maybe some of you already know that. 2, find your match. So finding your match, both at a professional level, again, career, volunteer work, community, etc., is really important. So figure out what you're good at. Find what makes you happy in your life. That could be writing, could be tutoring, it doesn't matter what it is. But as Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. And that's really important. But it's also really important to find your match at a personal level, not just a professional level. There's a scale in psychology, and it's called the sensation-seeking scale. And the key about the scale is what it does is assess people's desire to sort of spend time in a rousing and exciting environment. Some people like it a lot, some people don't like it. Doesn't matter which you are. What matters is that you figure out what you are so you can find the right kind of environment that makes you happy at a personal level. So I'm going to give everybody a quick version of this scale so you can kind of sort yourself into who you are. I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you have to raise your hand for which choice better describes you. So choice 1, some people think it would be fun to parachute out of an airplane. Some people would like to never parachute out of an airplane. So who are the parachute people here? All right, let's put hands down. And who are the smart people? Okay. So that's 1. 2, some people, when they jump into a pool, go toe, knee, ankle, thigh. Some people, when they go into a pool, go dive, cannonball right in. So who's toe, knee, ankle, thigh? Okay, hands down. And who's dive, cannonball? Okay. 3. Some people, when they go on vacation, like the excitement and adventure of camping outdoors. Some people, when they go on vacation, like the warmth and comfort of a luxury hotel. Who are the campers? And who are the luxury hotel people? Yeah, I say to my husband, your camping wife is your second wife. But anyway, so again, doesn't matter which one you are. The key is figuring out which one you are, because different kinds of things make different people happy. And that's, again, about finding your match. 3. And this is the first time I give this talk a lot, but this is the first time I've ever given it in a library. And so this next one is especially special. Read a book you love. So who here has ever read a book they love so much they didn't want it to end? So most of us have had that experience. So this is my husband's favorite book. He reads it. I know, people are like, oh, it's like super gloomy. He reads it. He finishes it. He starts it again at the beginning. I say, we're going to save so much money in our marriage. You just need the one book. But he loves the writing. He loves the father-son story. He loves this book. So again, it doesn't matter what book it is, but find a book you love and pour yourself into it. It's a wonderful way of increasing happiness. 4, keep a gratitude journal. So who here goes to sleep at night thinking about your to-do list and the problems you're facing the next day? So this is like a different idea. So this idea is to go to sleep at night only after you've written down 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for in your life right now. And the right now is important. So they can't be things that you're like, I'll be grateful for once I retire. I'll be grateful for once I move. I'll be grateful for, whatever. There are things that you're grateful for in your life right now. As this quote by Dale Carnegie says, one of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. So this is about focusing on what you're grateful for in your life right now. 5, and 5 is one of my favorites, and 5 is make a gratitude visit. So this idea came from a professor at Penn, Marty Seligman, and what he has people do is to think about a person who changed and shaped their life in some fundamental way. Could be a teacher, could be a boss, could be some kind of a mentor, but somebody who had a fundamental impact on changing and shaping the nature of your life. So when I describe that, who here has somebody that comes to mind who played that role for you? Who here has somebody? Yes, so many of us do. So then, after you've thought of that person, you write that person a letter telling them what they meant to you, how they changed and shaped the nature of your life, and then you travel to that person, you stand in front of them, you read the letter aloud. And that is an extraordinarily powerful experience, of course, for the person who's hearing the letter and for the person who's reading the letter. Here's the challenge. Guess when most of us take the opportunity to tell people what they meant to us? When they're dead. It's a eulogy. So this idea is not to wait for the eulogy. So when I think of the person who played that role in my own life, it was my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Doherty had been a Marine in World War II. And he had lost his right arm picking up a grenade. So he had a stump on his right hand. He had a big silver, like Captain Hook, prothesis that wrapped around his shoulder. And he wrote on the chalkboard, with this hook in his hand, I went to public school. He also smoked throughout the entire day. So the whole thing was very scary. There was this stump and this hook and this smoke, and he was a Marine, and he was loud and red, and he was terrifying. But every paper I wrote for Mr. Doherty, he covered in red. Expand, unpack, details, organize, clarity, whatever. Every paper I did for Mr. Doherty came back covered in red. Mr. Doherty taught me how to write. So as my lovely introduction today said, I was an undergraduate at Stanford. I was a graduate student at Princeton. I pretty much have the career I have right now because I write. But I didn't learn how to write at Princeton or Stanford. I learned how to write from Mr. Doherty in 7th and 8th grade. That's probably why I'm here talking to you tonight. And when I learned that Mr. Doherty had died, I wrote his widow a letter and told her that. But that was too late. That was too late. And so the key is, don't wait for the eulogy. You have a limited amount of time. Don't wait for the eulogy. Tell the person while you still can. So that's 5. 6, smile. Even when you aren't happy. So the interesting thing about this is that we often think about smiling as a manifestation of how we're feeling. But what the research in psychology tells us is that the act of smiling can change how we feel. So this is the sort of fake it till you make it idea, as this quote illustrates. Sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. Very clever study to demonstrate this. Brought in people and had them hold chopsticks in their teeth in one of 3 facial expressions. Neutral expression, mild smile, big booming smile. Then, with the chopstick still in your teeth, you put your hand in a bucket of freezing cold ice water. And they said, keep it there as long as you can. And when you can't stand it anymore, pull it out. So what's amazing is that people who held the chopsticks in this expression kept their hand in the bucket of ice water significantly longer. They didn't experience that as so painful, suggesting that holding the smile not only made you feel better, it also increased your tolerance to pain. It changed your body's reaction to pain. Who remembers the baseball player study I started the talk with today? Same expressions. So this is a possible mechanism by which the men who went through life with this expression may have in fact experienced better health throughout their lives and in fact lived on average 7 years longer. 6, perform random acts of kindness. Perform random acts of kindness. And what I love about this one is almost anything counts. So people who volunteer in their community experience higher levels of happiness. People who donate to charity experience higher levels of happiness. I'm going to show you next a map of the world. And in every country on this map, any country colored in green, there's a positive correlation. So more charitable giving, more happiness. So here's the data. So what you can see is that most of the entire world is covered in green. This is a very, very consistent finding. Charitable giving and happiness are positively correlated. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, does that mean that giving makes us happy, or that happy people give, or that wealthy people are happy and also give? So to answer that really important question, researchers in 20 of these countries, so not all of these countries, but in 20 of these countries, did a second study. What they did was they had people come in, do a short psychology study, then half of them were told, thank you for coming in for the study. Here's a gift bag you get to keep to thank you for your participation. The other half were told, thank you for coming in for this study. Here's a gift bag. We're donating to a local children's hospital to thank you for coming in for the study. Then they measured happiness. Guess who's happier, first group or second group? Second group. Your bag going to the hospital increased your own level of happiness. So again, it's actually that giving does make us happier. And again, in lots of different ways. I talked about this earlier, but there's lots of evidence suggesting that giving gifts to anyone makes us feel happier. So I talked before about giving a gift to a friend. I had a wonderful experience of happiness just about a year ago now. I had been signed up for a number of years on the bone marrow registry. And last October, I got a call saying I was a match with a stranger. And, would I go in and donate bone marrow? So I went to the Dartmouth Medical Center. I spent 2 days in the hospital. And I left with this amazing feeling of happiness. It was one of the most positive experiences I've ever had, because when I think about it, I might have saved somebody's life. It's not somebody I know, it's not a relative, it's not a friend, but the idea that I might have done this is to this day one of the most extraordinary feelings that I've ever had in terms of that opportunity. And that's just an example about how giving in almost any way, shape, or form to anyone increases our own feeling of happiness, makes us feel better. In a follow-up to the broader research on sort of giving and happiness, research has brought in people, done MRI data, and they've had people imagine giving a gift to a friend. So they put them in an MRI machine and said, imagine you're giving a gift to a friend. When you have people do that exercise, the part of the brain that is activated, that lights up, is the part of the brain that processes rewarding experiences. The same exact part of the brain that's activated when you eat chocolate. Also when you use cocaine, but that's like a less good example. 8, spend money on the right things. So I've talked before today, money and happiness, no, there's no correlation, but you can spend money in better or worse ways. So, what makes us happy? Spending money on experiences. So this could be tickets to a Broadway show, tickets to a concert, tickets to the big game, etc. My brother lives in Chicago, longtime season ticket holder with the Chicago Cubs, which for years has been a fruitless endeavor. And last fall, he called me, which is great for him. Yeah. So last fall, he called me with a very unusual question in the life of a Cubs fan. And here was his question. What should I do with my playoff tickets?
Keep 'em.
Well, that was his question. So what he said was, I could keep them, take my wife and 2 kids to the game, or I could sell them and make $10,000. What should I do? And so I said, well, Matt, what the research on the science of happiness would tell us, and here's what the research would tell us. I said, you should do one of 2 things. Either you should keep them, go to the game, take your wife and kids, have a wonderful, memorable experience, or 2, you should sell them, take the $10,000, and take a wonderful trip. You should go to, Hawaii, you should go to Disney, you should do something wonderful. What you shouldn't do is buy new living room furniture. That's what the research would say. As a sort of aside, I gave this talk in Chicago literally right last year as the Cubs were entering the playoffs, and a woman emailed me after the talk and she said, I just want you to know that I too was having the dilemma that your brother is having about what to do with my playoff tickets. And she said, and after your talk, I called my oldest grandson and I said, we're going to the game on Monday. And that way, I'm spending money on experiences, and the 2 of us are already anticipating the engagement in this experience. So that's really sort of what the research would say. So this year for Christmas, my kids are all getting an experience. That's what we did last year. So one of my boys got tickets to a Boston Celtics game. One of my boys got tickets to a Bruins hockey game. My daughter, who is then 11, is a big Dancing with the Stars fan. Anybody here watch Dancing with the Stars? So here's a picture of my daughter in between Sharma and Val. And so she got tickets to this, their tour. And let me just say in retrospect, the best day of her life, that's the good news. Bad news is also her now career ambition. Also bad news is it turns out really not such an appropriate tour for an 11-year-old girl. Nonetheless, okay. But so what does not make us happy? And what does not make us happy in terms of spending money is belongings. Expensive watch, purse, car, whatever. It's exciting initially and then it's just your watch. It doesn't bring us the same happiness as experiences. As nobody says on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. Right? As George Carlin says, trying to be happy by accumulating possessions is like trying to satisfy hunger by taping sandwiches all over your body. Doesn't make us happy. 9, avoid comparisons. And this, I think, is one of the most important ones in today's day and age, avoiding comparisons. Here's a cartoon that speaks to this. So it's 2 people talking, and one says, I do count my blessings, but then I end up counting those of others who have more and better blessings, and that pisses me off. As Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And this issue of comparison is really, really tricky in today's day and age of social media. So many people are on something that I like to call fake book. And what you see overwhelmingly in research on social media is that people post about only the what? Only the good. My kid is valedictorian. I just ran the Boston Marathon in under 3 hours. Again. We all went to Tahiti for 2 weeks and loved each other the whole time. So when I'm on Facebook, I try to write things like, all of my kids have lice. Which more often than not has been true. But here's the key about comparisons. We all have choices about the comparisons we make. And we can make comparisons that make us feel better. We can make comparisons that make us feel worse. That's also our choice. So when my son, the Spanish scholar, was failing out of prep school, what I would tell myself is, he doesn't have leukemia. And here's the reality. There are parents all over whose kid is having chemotherapy in a hospital. And that parent wishes their kid was failing Spanish in high school. And again, that's the key. We can make a comparison that makes us feel better. We can make a comparison that makes us feel worse. That's within our control. Final thing, build and maintain close relationships. This is the single biggest predictor of our happiness. But here's the challenge. Relationships are hard. Relationships take time and energy and effort and conflict and compromise. They are hard work. I use this picture as a metaphor for close relationships. And so this is a picture of a dancer on one side on point, on the other side in a toe shoe, on one side in a toe shoe, on the other side missing that point shoe. And if you look at a dancer on point, it looks beautiful. It looks effortless and easy and magical. But the reality of dancing on point is you're missing toenails. You're bloody, you're bruised, it's painful, it's really, really hard. And that it's only to look at it from a distance that looks easy, but that doing it takes tremendous energy and time and pain and effort. And my final quote for you today is by Tolstoy and speaks to this. But on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at it that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. And that's really the challenge. Relationships are an extraordinarily important predictor of our happiness, but in order to get those good relationships, we have to be willing to invest time and energy and effort. And as was alluded to in my lovely introduction, I also have this lovely dog. And here's the key. Who here has a lovely pet? Pets bring us what kind of love? Unconditional. With pets, you're not doing the conflict and the compromise and the effort and the time and the energy, which is why, as noted, my husband and I have the deal. If one of us leaves the other one, the one who leaves takes the 3 kids. The other gets the dog. That has kept our relationship very strong, very, very committed, because no one can leave. And my final example, I'll tell you, that speaks to this. I gave this talk a couple years ago in Dallas, and a man came up afterwards and said, I have the perfect illustration of your point about the dog. Imagine you come home one night, and you put your dog and your wife in the trunk of a car, and you drive around for an hour. At the end of the hour, when you open the trunk, who's still happy to see you? And then the man was like, I'm divorced. I was like, really? I can't imagine. I'm sure? How'd that happen? Anyway, So you all have been a lovely audience. Thank you so much. I'm sorry some of you did not have seats, etc. But thank you so much for listening. I think we have time for questions. I know it's late, etc. If you have to leave, of course, that's fine. But if you have questions that don't get answered, you can contact me here. So I'll just keep this up, but that's my office phone number. And my email address is Sanderson, so CASANDERSON, and then it's at Amherst, AMHERST.edu. You can also very easily Google Catherine Sanderson Amherst, and this email comes up if you don't write it down. That comes up very easily. And I'd be glad to send anybody this entire slide deck in the mail or via email. And you can also watch for free a video of a version of this talk on my website, which you can also find by Googling me as well. So thank you so much. You've been a lovely audience, and I'm certainly glad to take questions. Thank you.
So if North Dakota is one of the 5 happiest states, what are the other 4 happiest
Yeah,
states?
so I gotta be honest, it changes all the time. And so so year to year, but here's the key. The states that are not happy tend to be states that are high in poverty. And so in today's day and age, it's basically the southern red states, to be honest. I mean, so states in which there's relatively high levels of poverty, you see very low levels of happiness proportionally. So it typically is something around Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and that tends to be where you see lower levels of happiness. And again, that's because the net impact of lots of people living in poverty is it really pulls it down. So really important question.
Where's Vermont?
Vermont's high. Vermont's actually high, in part because there's relatively low levels of poverty and there's wonderful nature. So Vermont tends to be high in terms of it, but you can all get higher. So don't give up and just, yeah.
Well, everyone here in Vermont gets higher.
Yeah.
All right, I've got this. So I'm a science geek, as you are, and I wonder if you're confident that you're able to evaluate, quantify, and thereby compare regions, people, countries, and so on in the context of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And do you rely primarily on neurophysiological data? Do you rely primarily on self-reported data? So please let me know your state of confidence in the state of understanding happiness.
Sure. So it's a very interesting question, and I get some version of that question a lot. And so here's the challenge: is that we don't know much about happiness. That's true. We just don't know, and that's in part because the field of psychology, for years, as many people probably know, focused on the bad. Neuroses, phobias, anxiety, problems. That was psychology's bread and butter, the bad. Only within about the last couple of decades have people in psychology even been focusing on happiness. So this is a new field. I am talking about new research and new data. So am I confident that this would generalize across countries, people, etc.? Not really, because this is a new science. This is a new field. But I will also say that many of these questions are being asked by scientists across different countries. So this is not just uniquely American data, as I've referenced a couple of times. We also know that there is a bitter debate, currently a bitter debate, between 2 schools of people: psychologists, economists. Bitter debate. And they believe you should be asking about happiness in different ways. So we don't have, to answer part of your question, we don't have good data on really what brain activation means. So what does brain activation mean? Is that really happiness? Is that just familiarity? We don't have great data. The MRI data, of course, is all very new. But here's an example of how psychologists and economists differ in terms of their use of self-report data. If you ask women who have little kids at home and who are staying at home, not working outside the home, how do you feel about your life, and how do you feel about being a mom, and how do you feel about being a parent, etc.? They overwhelmingly say, oh, I love being a mom, I love my kids, I love my life, I'm so happy. That's how psychologists ask the question. Economists don't ask that question. They ask, right now, this very second, how do you feel? Rate it on a 1 to 10, right this second. And people who are sitting on the floor playing Legos with their kids are like, my life sucks. They're totally unhappy. In fact, playing with your kids, bathing your kids, all that stuff rates like lower than doing laundry. At least I'm productive. At least I'm folding the towels. And so what's interesting is that's actually a current debate, even within the fields of psychology and economics. What is the right way to study? And that's one of the things that makes giving this talk exciting, is that frankly, the answers to many questions are changing and evolving as we learn more. Great question, thank you.
Also a bone marrow recipient, so thank you very much.
I love hearing that, I love hearing that. So again, made me super happy, and I'm so glad that you're here.
Me too.
More questions from me.
Too narrowed in, focused. So experiences, yes. Possessions, no. What about tools of the trade, tools for an artist, tools for, if that is your passion? Is that been looked at?
Yes, it actually has, and there's really interesting data suggesting that in fact makes us happy, because it's really part of creating. It's part of doing something meaningful. Related to that also, they've done research looking at the difference between spending money on experiences versus belongings, as I talked about. One of the things I think that also explains that relationship, which I think relates to your question, is that often when we have experiences, we talk about them with people. So we go back to our friends or our neighbors and say, let me tell you about the trip we took to here, let me tell you about this thing that we saw last night. So it's also a way of sort of sharing. We also often do experiences with somebody. I'm gonna take this hike with you, or I'm gonna go to this concert with you. We feel weirder coming into the office and being like, I bought a big screen TV this weekend. Again, it's like, seems like you're weird. So I think that's also part of it. And so buying things that relate to your profession, relate to your passion, are really about creating, doing something, and again, something that you could then share with others, anticipate, right? Once I have this new set of paints, look what I'm going to be able to do, etc. Yeah, interesting question. Yes.
I wanted to ask if there's any hope for us introverts. I mean,
Yeah.
are those extroverts
Right.
really happier, or do
Right.
they just look happy?
Exactly. Well, so here's the key. What's interesting, of course, is that extroverts probably have an easier time tapping into social networks because they have an easier time meeting people, but that doesn't mean they're higher quality, right? So it's sort of like extroverts probably have an easier time finding thousands of people, as opposed to close people. Absolutely, there's evidence that introverts can find happiness, and part of it is that sort of relates to that sensation-seeking scale that I said at the end. Introverts and extroverts find happiness in different ways, right? They need to look for it in different places. Yeah, great question, thanks. And I think there's somebody over here.
The first time I was introduced to happiness as being something that you could actually work on yourself was Barry Kaufman and his wonderful little book, Happiness is a Choice. And he has this great little thing, it's this little teeny formula. E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. He says you have no control over the event, but total control over the response, and whatever the response is going to drive the outcome. And it was just profound to me.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I think what's so important about that formula and that example is that we often think about happiness as something that happens to us, right? Well, I'll be happy when, or I'll be happy if I win the lottery, I get married, whatever. And that quote really illustrates, a profoundly important and very consistent finding in the literature, which is that a lot of our happiness depends on how we think about it. And that's what's really, essential. Yes.
So my name is John, and I had a question relating to the fact that she said, is there any hope to introvert being happy? And I am currently a patient at Brattleboro Retreat, and was curious because it's an ongoing science as well as far as addiction goes. I came here a little late, didn't even know the seminar was going on, so I'm kind of, interested in the fact that what do you know about finding happiness through individuals that deal with depression, anxiety, addiction, which obviously overrules the rational front part of the brain.
Yeah, so that's a really important question, and I'm so glad you're here, and I wish you, all the best in terms of your recovery. So this is what the research would say, that on the one hand, there is lots of evidence now in psychology, in biology, and psychiatry, that there are people who have a genetic predisposition to depression, to anxiety, to addiction, etc. It's a genetic predisposition. So it's really like a change in the chemical makeup of a person's body. And in cases in which there's a chemical imbalance, we do know lots about pharmacological treatment. So people can be helped by having drug treatment, people can be helped by having inpatient or outpatient therapy, and those are all extraordinarily important tools, especially for people that are at risk of harming themselves in some way. And so one of the challenges is that a lot of the strategies I talked about here require deliberate motivation and effort. So we know that people who spend time outside in nature feel happier. We know that people who read a book feel happier. People who are in the throes of addiction and depression can't be motivated to go out and take a walk in nature, can't be motivated to go and buy a book, because at the moment the struggle is so deep and so serious that taking the sort of first steps to doing something to make themselves feel better just seems impossible. So what this research would really say is that getting help in order to climb out of the very bottom gives you a chance at sort of finding tools that you can then take advantage of in your life in other ways. But getting help from treatment professionals is really essential to give you the motivation and the skill set to be able to take advantage of some of these things. But certainly lots of research, and in fact, many of the people who are doing research on happiness came to it because they're not sort of genetically happy. So I have a family history of depression, of bipolar disorder, of anxiety. I don't come to happiness easily. I'm not in the 50% that genetically is happiness for me. But what I will say is that very consistently, I catch myself saying, you know what? I got a lot of emails, I got a lot of grading to do, I'm gonna go for a walk. And that's because, again, I give this talk and it reminds me of the things that I need to do in order to stay happy. But it's a constant issue for me in terms of literally reminding myself, this is what I'm gonna do, because this is gonna make me feel better. But it's not something that comes easily or naturally to me personally.
I guess I'm going to contest your notion that having children does not bring happiness. I love being pregnant. I love the result of giving birth. And I love being a parent. And now I'm a grandparent. And I'm over the moon being a grandparent.
Yeah.
But it is also, I mean, your final thing was a deep personal relationship. And if that's not building very, very deep relationships, I don't know what else really is.
Yes, and so certainly research would suggest that parents who end with deep, profound relationships with their adult children and with their children, growing up, etc., do get tremendous benefits and happiness from it. I think the challenge is that not everybody experiences happiness from parenthood in the same way that you did. That for
15 years hard.
Right.
People were conflicted about having a career and children. Very hard. So
Right.
I wonder who you were asking.
Right. Well, so there's lots of research showing the comparison. So first of all, men tend to find having children more pleasant than women, right? Yeah. So, part of it. I actually was on, I was interviewed on the Today Show with Kathy Lee and Hoda, whatever. Anyway, it was horrible. But, and everybody's like, you have to do it. You'll totally regret it if you don't. And no, that was wrong. But anyway, but so I made the point of happiness and, children, and Kathy Lee was like, no, I totally disagree, whatever. Okay, so how much help did Kathy Lee have raising her children, right? So I might have enjoyed it more if I had a live-in housekeeper and a nanny and somebody else did all the laundry, right? And so part of it is that there are differences in terms of how much you had to take on. So the idea of combining being a parent with having a career makes it harder. It's harder for women than it is for men. It also has peaks and valleys. So actually, maybe this goes with your intuition, birth to 5 is really hard for many people. The diapers, the not sleeping, the sort of the total worry about, everything. Teenage years, also bad. There seems to be a golden 5 to 12. So kids 5 to 12, that seems to be, they're not in a heap of trouble, and they can dress themselves, right? I'm not wiping their bottoms, you know, and so there's golden years of 5 to 12, although my kids now are 18, 15, and 12, so I'm like 6 months away from having 3 teenagers. Yeah, and then I'm going to give this talk all the time, hopefully not in my hometown. Anyway, so yes, so yes, you're exactly right, and your intuition is exactly right, that factors that influence what parenting is like for a person do influence it. Single parents have a harder time, you know, so not doing it with somebody else is also harder. Yeah. I know you have other stuff you want to do, so I don't want to overstay my welcome.
Any others? All right, it looks like not.
And if I didn't get to yours or you think of one later, I'm certainly glad to respond to questions if you send me an email, if there's something else I can do. And just let me say thanks again for being such a lovely audience. I really had a wonderful time being here, and thank you for the invite.
Oh my goodness.